I'd just like to quickly, before we start, because I think we have a fair amount to talk about Desi Chickpeas, just introduce the panel. And we've got Ahmad from Awam in Pakistan. There's Harish Kumar, who's the Managing Director of Arab India Spices and UAE. Saurabh Bhatia from Glencore, India. Peter Wilson, who is from the Australian Milling Group and also is the Chairman of Pulse Australia. And Mostyn Gregg from Glencore, Australia. Welcome, everyone. As per the program, Vijay Iyengar was also supposed to be here, but just apologies on his behalf. He did ask me to spell that out. So he's just not present with us at the moment. Yeah. So we're trying to cover an agenda over here to talk about the global demand and supply scenario, and also production, consumption, imports, exports from various markets, and the market dynamics and price movements. So what we've tried to format in this panel is that the panelists talk about the market that they are prevalent in, and just take it up from there, and towards the end we'll try and formulate some kind of a global scenario where we can try and come up with some kind of a view of what the Desi chickpea market is doing today and what it would be doing in a few months' time. So that was the agenda, and we would also be incurring just discussing the weather issues and many other factors, the currency fluctuations just overnight. Over the past one day, the Australian dollar and the Canadian dollar have appreciated substantially. That does affect a lot, so we'll just discuss into that. With that, maybe Peter, if we can start with you on the chickpeas from Australia, and just your view on what you think the Australian market is.
I think everybody can see the data there. The big standouts in the last couple of years from a Desi chickpea perspective, I think, is the confluence of events that it really led to enormous supplies out of Australia in the 2012 harvest period. So October, November, December 2012, we really shot the lights out in terms of production, and the official figures suggest around about 740 or 50,000 tonnes. Anecdotally, with the export data, clearly we had probably a bigger crop than that, and that was followed up. And I guess the point was that farmers responded to high prices the previous years, and we had very good weather conditions, and that really produced a very nice crop. That followed up with very big crops in other destination markets. Last year was a different story. We had a very, very dry finish. Winter was fairly disappointing for most of Northern Australia, and therefore we cut production quite substantially from the previous year. And so whilst the 2012 harvest may be a little understated, officially the 2013, i.e. the October, November, December harvest is probably a little overstated in terms of the size of crop that was produced. 2014, anybody who listened to me at Goa probably heard my tale of woes about very, very dry conditions in Northern Australia. So the 480,000 hectares that we think will get sown, all things being equal, is still a little bit of a pie in the sky. We do need precipitation in Northern Australia. We've had some repair to the moisture profile in our deep soils, but it would be, I'd be getting a little excited if I suggested that it was a lay-down misere that we would actually get those hectares planted. So in Australia, we always talk about potential, and I think we all know the difference between potential and reality. And I mean, many times we've certainly seen a great potential in Australia, and then the weather has conspired to give us a very different outcome. There are still stocks available in Australia on farm. However, they are being very, very tightly held. The farmer is not giving it up lightly, and so it's. I think we're just going to grind towards the end of the year. unless we have significant rainfall that improves sowing conditions and liquidity.
Just on, you mentioned the potential versus the actual, so maybe on the next slide, you could just elaborate a bit that on the basis of hectare sows, how the production and all varies, and with a realistic view as of this year, 2014, what you actually think the production should be versus the area sown.
I think the exciting thing about this particular graph is the fact that Australian farmers are getting better and better and better at getting the yields out of Desi chickpeas. I mean, and Pulse Australia takes a lead role in making sure the best husbandry advice is available to all of the agronomists that are advising farmers. So we continue to see a nice growth in yield. So we talked about it recently that we probably thought about 1.5 tonnes per hectare is a fairly traditional ambit claim as to what we think is possible. Now, there are many farmers in areas such as central Queensland who are using various seeding techniques and timing of sowing that are, getting up to a tonne to the acre. So that's 2.5 tonnes per hectare on Desi. So, look, if we can get the area sown, I'd be quite comfortable to say that, 1.5 to 1.8 is possible. But we really got to get that crop in the ground, and it isn't in the ground yet.
So, Mostyn, just to you, what would your view be? Would you support what Peter's saying?
I think Peter's. I too agree with what Peter said there. I think I'm probably going to have a slightly more bullish tone than Peter is, though, but as you would expect. But my take on it is that, along the same lines, is that as Peter has alluded to, it's not even in the ground. So it is very much pie in the sky. I think the price signals that we've sent the market and the grower over the last 18 months has not prompted him to want to put more chickpeas in. I think the massive crop we saw in 2012 that Peter was talking about, a lot of that was due to, and then the next year the plantings was those exceptional prices to the grower. Now, if you look at correlations and comparing it to wheat and barley, the fact that these guys in a lot of places have gone through 2 years of drought and have received amazing figures for those who had wheat, barley, etc. That the correlation, the relativity to chickpeas hasn't been there. So my fear, as a marketer who wants to buy tonnes, is that the grower has been trained into believing that he's not going to get the price that he believes is fair value for his chickpeas. And I think, and it goes back to Peter's point before, that these tightly held stocks, it's all well and good to talk about a carryout, but you've got a grower who has massive amounts of on-farm storage, who has employed people from GrainCorp and other experts in handling chickpeas to build on-farm storage, and he's a reluctant seller, and well, he and she, I should say, is a reluctant seller, and actually getting that onerous carry-out that we've got and that stock coming out of our countries, I think it's going to prove very difficult, and looking at the 3-month forward forecast and El Nino effects, etc. I think if the grower reads the same weather sites that I do, he's going to be reluctant to release what he sees as a drought hedge, something that he can store, that lasts well. It's not like wheat, etc., that potentially has the chance to fly away on an insect's wing, and it'll store well, and he'll sit on it. So I think if we do see some further rainfall and some timely rainfall across that whole belt, I think that's a positive thing. We'll see an excellent crop. But my fear is that the risk is to the downside from a hectares and from a production point of view.
Thanks, Mostyn. Just Peter, before we go to the others, there's a lot of talk about carry forward or carry over stocks, and we do see 2012 crop being traded as of today, and there is a 2013 stock also. So I've just put up this estimate of stocks, which, sorry, you've put it up, but any comments on this as to elaboration?
Yeah, look, it's probably a little, and I agree with Mostyn, I think it is a little academic right now. Farmers are holding Desi chickpeas as a drought hedge. They've been storing very well, and I make the point that the 2012, the stuff that we're getting across our weighbridge in Northern Australia, a lot of the 2012 product is just coming in. It's just gorgeous. It's a light colour. It's been very well preserved in high quality on-farm storage. We haven't seen a lot of the oxidisation that you would typically see in Desi chickpeas. So they're holding their colour really nicely, which and they're very good. They're very sound in terms of the skin coat is still very adhered to the dal, which means they really aren't. We're not seeing product with high levels of defectives or splits. Having said all that, so the quality is good. The 2012 and the 2013, I guess, carry-in is of a very good quality. But to paraphrase Charlton Heston, when he was talked about the giving up his guns in the United States, he said they'll have to prize it out of my cold, dead hands. Well, that's a little bit like Desi chickpeas are in terms of farmers wanting to sell them at the moment.
Okay, I think we've got a snapshot and a pretty detailed view on Australia. Now, Ahmed, your views on Pakistan as to the variation between last year, this year, production, consumption. So, if you could just elaborate on that.
Morning, everyone. Pakistan is a very important market with regards to chickpeas, because not only it can produce a lot of chickpeas, but it consumes also a lot of Desi chickpeas. I will start with 2 years back, when we had a crop which was like 200,000 ton, and we eventually went out to buy out Australia, Ethiopia, Tanzania. We had some product from Burma, Russia. The countries we never heard of, we got Desi chickpeas. Prices went skyrocket to around $800, and during that time, farmers had a very good potential. They had a very good potential to seed a very big Desi chickpeas crop, and they did indeed. They planted a very big crop, and they were paid off with good rain, which resulted in a crop which was a record crop for Pakistan of 1.1 million ton. That year, that year, our prices came down to like from $900 to $350, which means like our Desi chickpeas was being traded lower than the yellow peas. Even some of the feed material was being sold at a higher price. So when Desi was being sold at such a lower price, as you can see, our consumption for Desi chickpeas got very high. From a normal of 700,000 tons, it went up to 900,000 tons. The most affected was yellow peas, because it took over of about 100,000 tons of yellow peas demand. Most of it was consumed for Desi chickpeas. All other products like red lentil, black mape, each and every product was affected and was substituted because mostly people were using Desi chickpeas because it was very cheaper. Coming to the new crop, this year was also a very big crop was planted, but unfortunately we did not get enough rain, and our crop estimate is about only 400,000 tons. Now you can see a crop of 200,000 tons to 1.1, and then again back to 400,000. The reason mainly behind is this is that wherever we have this irrigation system, we are planting wheat. But where we don't have this irrigation system, we are planting Desi chickpeas. So we are totally dependent on natural rainfall. If we get a good rain, a timely rain, then we get a good crop. If we don't get a good rain, then we get a very bad crop.
Yeah, one question that stands out on this, which I just noticed, was you're talking about consumption over there, and 900,000 is fair enough because you had a large crop. And prior to that, you're talking about 550. It is kind of related to the production of the crop. So why do you think that consumption would be at 700,000 tons given a very small crop of 400,000? Don't you actually reduce consumption if it's a small crop?
Well, see, this 700,000, I would say this should even be more than that. The reason is that so far prices in Pakistan has not improved. Like as of today, our local market is still at a parity of $480, And with yellow peas not being in Pakistan, it's being sold around 460 levels. So there is a very lower gap between yellow peas and Desi chickpeas. And if you see other products like lentil, black mape, Kabuli chickpeas, all products are being sold at a very high price. So this is the only product which is at a very fairly cheap price. I foresee that it should be more than 700,000 tons, but it should at least be 700,000 tons. Coming on the prices now, why is this price so low? We have a crop of 400,000 tons, still the prices are so low. The reason is that we had a carryover of about 200K since last crop. And adding to this 400,000, we have a crop of 600,000, so we need 100,000 ton of import this year. But the problem is that this 200,000 ton carryover stock is of last year, and it's not like Australia, where product is very safe and sound. We don't keep it in cold storage. It's kept in warehouses. So people are scared that quality could deteriorate, so they want to sell. And when we had this our new crop, what happened was right at the time of crop, we had some rain. So what happened that the cargo for the new crop had a very high moisture. So farmers, they don't have, they want to sell the product because they're scared that quality could get worse. And buyers, they are not much interested in buying this kind of product because they don't know if they can keep it for a long time.
The low prices of Desi chickpeas as compared to other commodities, I'm sure Saurabh has a few things to add also, but just this is just a graph that Emma that put forth showing the production and consumption, that at times the consumption is higher than the production, and then there are imports that are involved. But just coming to India, Saurabh, if you could take it up from there.
Good morning, everybody. So the slide that you see in front of you is basically based on the government data or the official figures on the chana. According to Government of India, this year our production is close to 10 million tons, which I personally disagree with. And with the government data, there has been over last few years, we really don't know how government has been increasing yields year on year, which we are not seeing on the ground, and the production estimates have gone up from 5 million tons almost 7 years back to 10 million tons now, which looks very difficult. From last year, government has increased the area of chickpeas, which looks unlikely because the prices were quite low that the farmers got last year, and we received a fair bit of good rainfall. So the area for wheat and other competing crops had increased compared to chana. So disagree with that number, and also on the yield.
Saurabh, if I can just interrupt you there, I know that you've got a few slides, so do you mind just moving them back and forth?
Sure. On the yield, the estimates that we get from our field team and from the various independent research companies is that the yield in chana is anywhere between 600 to 700 kg per hectare. In MP, we have seen yields increasing to as high as 800 to 850 kg per hectare year to year, depending on the weather prospects. So basis the above, my numbers are very different, which you'll see in the forthcoming slides. Also, the government production estimates include the Kabuli production also, which varies between 400,000 tons to 800,000 tons given from year to year. As far as my estimates are concerned, this year's crop in MP is lower by 30% from last year. A portion of it is contributed by lower acreage this year in MP, and remaining is coming mainly because of yield loss that we faced in MP. There were torrential rains during the month of February and early March, which resulted in crop damages, and crop damage to an extent of getting off-grade quality, but they were crop damage to such an extent that the crop was not recoverable. I mean, so that way MP had a lower yield by 30%. Rajasthan has a crop lower by 16%. Maharashtra, the area increased this year by 20% and yield has been remained more or less unchanged. So we have a 22% higher crop in Maharashtra. Andhra has a lower crop of 25%. Karnataka 8%. So overall we have a crop which is low by 8%. Now this 8%, the major contribution is coming from Kabuli, because our Kabuli crop from last year of 800,000 tons has gone down to 400,000 tons approx, whereas Desi production has unchanged, very slight, has changed marginally by 200,000 tons. Now 200,000 tons on a standalone basis is not a very big change in the production estimate, but we will see in forthcoming slides on how it impacts on the overall supply-demand scenario of India. From supply side, we have a lower Desi crop of 200,000 tons. States of Maharashtra and Gujarat have a higher crop of 500,000 tons. MP and Rajasthan, which are the two main states which drive the NCDX values, the crop is lower by 22%. And out of the...
Just a question here, Saurabh, that if you say that MP and Rajasthan combined is lower by 22%, and if they are the major producing,
Yes.
so why isn't the market picking up?
Well, the reason is that we are in the middle of our harvest. We have just completed our harvest in April. And as around 800 to 900,000 tons of crop harvested in MP and Maharashtra got rain damage, so that inferior quality material is keeping the spot values discounted, because that material is selling at $50 to $100 spread. And no stockists want to touch that stock. So it is only going for consumption as in end use. So the arrival in the market is not meeting the expected demand that it should. So there are days when the arrival in the market yard is not getting fully auctioned, because the off-grade material is not finding homes. Because of that, we are seeing that pressure. And also, till July, we are just building our stocks, because we are harvesting a 6 million ton crop. Our average consumption would be, say, 60 to 70,000 tons every month. No, I'm going wrong. It's a 6 million ton crop, so our average demand is close to 800,000 tons every month. So that is the main reason why we are seeing the pressure on spot values right now.
Yeah. You got another slide?
From the demand side, with the lower Kabuli crop this year from 800,000 tons to 400,000 tons, what we feel is that last year around 200 to 250,000 tons of small size white chickpeas or Kabuli chickpeas went into flour mill, into gram flour consumption. This year, with that figure being lower, we presume that it will result in an additional demand of Desi chana, which would increase the demand by say 200 to 250,000 tons. And also with chana being the lowest price commodity this year compared to other pulses, like even peas for that matter is trading quite higher than chana. This should result in some substitution impact towards chana, because we are seeing that lentils prices are trading at historic highs. Urad, lemon tur, all prices are in the range of $800 to $900 tons per ton. So, I mean, demand destruction would happen, but not across all pulses. So, basis that, I presume that India will have an additional demand of 500,000 tons this year vis-a-vis last year. So when we add the production estimate, the overall supply side, the demand side, this is how our S&D would look like. We started the year with a higher carry-in than last year, which was out of which 100,000 tons of material was lying at Bombay port, which was of imported stocks, and around 200,000 tons was in MP and balance 200,000 tons in interiors. A slightly lower crop this year of 200,000 tons. Import, we are assuming that we will meet the import estimates of last year and maybe slightly higher. So 250,000 tons basis that, and 500,000 ton of additional demand. I think we'll be ending the year with a very tight stock to use ratio of less than 2%. Now this scenario will change if we go back to the discussion on Australia that we had. If we are going to have a 700,000 ton crop in Australia and 100,000 ton carryover stock, if weather remains all good, then with the 800,000 ton crop in Australia, I think then the import demand from India could easily increase to 400, 500,000 tons, and we'll be fairly comfortable. But the question then will be that will Australian values go down to 470, 480 kind of levels, which the Indian market is at currently. So that we'll have to see. As I have increased my demand estimates for chickpeas this year as a factor of substitution, so I have tried to put forth across the historical price movement of chana and yellow peas, and as we see that since last 2 months, the yellow pea values are trading higher than chickpeas, which ideally should bring in some substitution impact. And this is how chana value looks when we compare it with across other 4 pulses, which is lemon tur, black mape, red lentils, and yellow peas. So still we are the cheapest price pulse right now, and we should have a higher demand than what we have seen for the past few years.
Thanks, Saurabh. What I noticed was you're talking about very low yields of chana production in India. You know, we just compare it to Australia, where Peter was mentioning 1.5 is still considered on the lower side, tons to the hectare. Yours is just 0.6. Well, just a question was, given all this talk about the International Year of the Pulses in 2016, so the chain of events would normally be, okay, you're targeting to increase consumption, and therefore the first thing would happen is the price would go up. And if the price goes up, then in India, is India geared on the production side to increase production to meet that demand, given that, for the next 2-3 years, there's going to be a huge push towards the International Year of the Pulses, and we hope that consumption actually increases?
Well, to answer that question, we first need to see why the yields in India have been lower, because the production can increase in India. For that, the yields have to go up. The yields in India have been primarily lower because the average size of the average farm size in India is less than an acre. So there is no economies of scale that a farmer can achieve by planting large crops. Then there is very limited input costs or very limited input that the farmer puts into his fields because of being poor or not having enough resources to buy fertilizers or whatever. So because of that, the yields have not been improving. Also, the Indian crop is typically a 90 to 100-day crop against Australian crop, which is say 120-day crop. We have seen similar cases in soybean where India is a large producer, but Indian yields are around 1 metric ton per hectare against Brazil and US, where the crop is 2 metric ton per hectare. So the difference is coming because even Indian soybean crop is of a 90-day crop compared to a 120-day crop in US and Brazil. So maybe that is also one of the reasons why Indian yields are lower compared to world standards, and our yields are lower not only in chana across all pulses, across oil seeds. In wheat, maybe we are close to world average, but in other commodities, our yields are quite low. And also, the area in which chana is planted is not the best land that the farmer has available. I mean, he plants chana only in the area which he cannot use for any other pulse, and especially if any other crop, not pulse. And in case there is availability of enough water, enough irrigation facilities, his preference is always to sow wheat. So that is why our yields are lower. Now, coming to your question on whether International Year of Pulses will have an impact on increased production in India. Honestly, I doubt that just because of it being an international year of pulses, it should have an impact in increasing production in India drastically, because the awareness is more to do with outside India. Indians have been eating pulses from ages. I mean, you go to any household in India, they are consuming pulses at least once in their 2 meals. So the awareness is not there. So I don't think International Year of Pulses will increase awareness very much in India. Yes, it will wake up the authorities on how pulses is so important, but it will have a major push in demand internationally. So yes, maybe the import demand that India needs the material may not be available at the values that it has been getting, as the prices will go up internationally. So basis that, depending on the farm economies and everything, we'll have to see and how the farmer reacts.
So
and
well,
everything.
that seems to be good news for Australia. Peter, you think that Australian production has scope for, let's say, doubling its chickpea crop over the next 5-6 years?
Look, I think from a Pulse Australia perspective, I'd be ecstatic if we could do that. One thing Australian farmers are very responsive to is price signals, which is why we saw the crop expand so dramatically during 2012. Farmers responded to the very, very strong price signals the previous year and during that production cycle, and they have demonstrated that they can use the world's best practice in terms of access to the genetics and then the package that surrounds those genetics on farm to really shoot the lights out in terms of what's produced at the end of the season, not in terms of just the yield output, but the quality and how it's maintained beyond, from a post-harvest perspective. So I think Desi chickpeas, they are Australia's flagship chickpea, Pulse, and I think that they certainly have potential for expansion into the future. But farmers will react to the market. They just won't produce them if they think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Before we go on to the Middle East, just a quick comment on the varieties of chickpeas in Australia, because it does concern me and many other people from the trade that you're talking about Jimbo chickpeas all the time, and we really aren't shipping Jimbo chickpeas. So do you think that this has to be some sort of an awareness that is transpired, which is sent out across to the markets on the other side?
Well, I guess the markets, and look, it happens across all pulses, we still talk in terms of some of the older lentil varieties because they become typified. And so a lot of the buyers in India and Bangladesh for that matter and Pakistan, they like to talk about Jimbo varieties, but of course Jimbo makes up less than 10% of that northern crop these days. So I talk in terms of sons and daughters of Jimbo because we are still dealing with the genetics, the base genetics that comes from the Jimbo variety. But we obviously have a range of new material that's coming through that PBA, that breeding program. And I guess I make the point that Pulse Australia, we have Tim Edgecombe, who I assume he's here. I think, Tim, there you go. Just noting for everybody that Tim did come today, which is good. But Tim sits on now that Pulse Breeding Australia board. And so we have direct input into advising the breeders of the sorts of material that the market is not just looking for today, but in the next 3, 5, 10 years. So, it's an integrated program. So
as if you say Jimbo is actually 10%, as of today, which are the larger chickpea varieties, 2, 3?
Now you're stretching. I'm just a poor silly grain trader. I don't know exactly. But varieties like, how's that? Slasher in the south, which is a little smaller pea, but, up in our part of the world, in Narrabri, we're probably talking, how's that? Is it flippers, Yorkers, pistols? Kyabra is a different class again because it represents that larger pea and actually causes a problem if they commingle Kyabra with, say, the Jimbo type because you end up with a larger pea and a smaller pea. But I think they're the main varieties in the north. So, but there's good material coming through the program is the point, so buyers can be very excited about the sort of quality they're going to see.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Now, yeah, just Harish, your thoughts on Middle East as such and Dubai, because we have seen, like 5-7 years back, Dubai was really hardly a market for chickpeas, but it's picked up and continues to grow. So just your brief comments on how you see the market there.
Hi, good morning. As you can see on the screen, the total imports is about 80,000 tons annually, out of which 75% of chickpeas is used for processing and 25% is consumed as whole. There are about 6 millers in UAE, I would say active millers. And we expect a total estimate growth of 15 to 20% over 5 years. As you are aware that Dubai has been awarded with Expo 2020. So it's still under planning stage, but we expect the construction of the site, Expo site, by end of this year. And Asian labor force would play a major role in increasing the consumption.
Yes. I see that you're saying 20% growth over the next 5 years. So what is driving that growth?
For the construction, they might need the labor force from Asian countries. And it's a big project. Expo 2020 is a big project.
Okay. And like India exports of pulses out of India, do you see that that'll affect or change? Because I think that the UAE at the moment is buying almost 100% out of Australia, the Australian chickpeas.
As you are aware that in 2007, the Indian government banned the export of pulses due to high inflation. And, but recently they had opened the export with some conditions which are merely impossible to meet. A very small amount of cargo has been moved from India, but even if the conditions were favorable for Indian millers, it would be very difficult for them to compete because UAE millers are competing at par with the international market.
Well, we'll just have a very quick round on Bangladesh. Maybe Peter, if you could just quickly comment, because we can't ignore Bangladesh market. It's huge, at least for Australia.
You're right, Chairman. Bangladesh is very, very important as a destination market for Australian Desi chickpeas. They typically 120 to 140,000. Now, last year we can't get into the head of the Bangladeshi buyer, but last year they imported about 200,000 tonnes, which means that created major indigestion in the Bangladesh market by about July last year. So we saw from a structural perspective, and I'll make just a couple of points on the structural nature of the market. In July, August, September last year, we had a confluence of events that really did see some major price adjustments occur beyond that period, in particular lead up to the harvest, and that was the over-importation of Desis into Bangladesh. It created defaults and a range of port-based problems there, banking-based issues, and that was, we also had lots and lots of stock sitting in India, which created some difficulties. So structurally, the market's been struggling for the last period of time, and Bangladesh probably a little bit more than others. Last year, Bangladesh had some major political issues. I would estimate that the country of Bangladesh probably worked somewhere between 30 and 50% of its time. It spent the rest of the time on strike or moving into strike and out of strike, and it really was a major problem, to the point where Ramadan demand last year, where people talk about the peak demand for pulses, just didn't happen. You know, they were expecting the big lifts out of the go-downs and the retail markets. It didn't happen. So by the time we got beyond that Ramadan period, we still had enormous stocks in Bangladesh, and of course it was just a major problem. But it remains a very important market. We're starting to see some levels of repair being done to that market. Some of the buyers won't come back from the dead. If they do, I will probably put them back in a box. But at the end of the day, we're starting to see some structural repairs in that market, and I would expect it to continue to be solid.
Yeah, that's good. Just before we go on to some questions, I just want to very quickly mention on East Africa, because Tanzania and Ethiopia have been there on the background. What stands out over here is the production. You're talking about over 250,000 tons, but they hugely, they consume a lot domestically, almost 90%. But so it's worth mentioning, at least on the Desi chickpea panel. Now, I just, because we're running short of time, I just, open it to the floor in case if there are any questions to the panelists over here today. If there are any questions.
Good morning. You mentioned the Bangladesh problems. Has that now been, the stocks have now been consumed there, and do you see the demand coming into the Ramadan period?
I think we're seeing some evidence of some optimism in the Bangladesh market. They are buying for a pre-Ramadan shipment. I guess we'll know over the next little while. One thing that has occurred, and of course it was a complete gobsmack really, we had all the instability through the last 12 months. And then we had an election, I think, in January, and the opposition actually chose not to run in the election. And I think we all expected that the turbulence would get greater and greater post the election, because the opposition said that they weren't going to participate, which they obviously didn't do, which meant they got slaughtered at the election. And post the election, we've had nothing but a sea of stability in Bangladesh. So, you know, I don't fully pretend to understand Bangladesh politics, but the good thing is stability breeds confidence. It breeds confidence in the financial sector, so the banks are starting to behave themselves a little bit more. Buyers are starting to return to the market. I anticipate good Ramadan offtake, and I think that will see some stocks pull down in Bangladesh. But it's still a little fragile, but it's better than it was.
So if there's any more questions? If there aren't, then, sorry. Yeah, after this question, we'll just do one round of views of the panelists, or what they think the market is, or the prices specifically over the next, say, 5 or 6 months leading into the new crop of November chickpeas in Australia. But yes, please.
Ali Balagamwala, Sea Trade Group, Pakistan. I have a question for Ahmed. You mentioned that we don't have cold storage facilities, and that's why we have a lot of problems in our storage. What actions are being done by the community on ground to make sure that there's more food security and stability in prices by putting up those cold storages?
Possibly I mentioned it a little wrongly. Actually, there are a lot of cold storage facilities, but stockists don't use cold storage over there because it's quite expensive, and they tend to have their own warehouses, so they try to keep it in their own warehouses. And for a year time, they can keep it safe and sound, so they don't really go for the cold storage.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think if we can just have one round of Mostyn, what your, just very, very briefly.
Very briefly, and I just wanted to make this point as well, that what we've seen with this market behaviour in the last 18 months is very much a hand-to-mouth spot buying behaviour. And I think this has been enabled by the fact that you can get containers out of Sydney and out of Brisbane. One of the things that we need to look at, and if we're looking at those numbers there, if we have a crop that looks supported and well made, and you've got to also think that there is going to be wheat and barley that's going to be competing for those containers. So I think, as per you've seen this year in Canada, logistics, if we have a good crop in Australia, logistics for Desi will be much more of an issue than this year. And that goes on to my next point, which is, as I said at the start, I'm fairly supportive. We've looked at that fantastic graphic that Sarah produced showing all the pulses against each other, and it's obvious even to a non-player in the market that Desi is the only one in that bearish direction. So I think you need to see a correction. For pricing from Australia, obviously very dependent on the Aussie dollar. It's as we mentioned before, we've seen a rally of almost a big figure in the last day and a half. And so with that sort of volatility we see in the Aussie, it's very difficult to give an actual, US dollar forecast. But I don't see it going down at any great rate from here.
Yeah, just on the logistics issue you mentioned, that 2 years ago Australia did have a large crop, and there's a shipment of 10 bulk vessels that went out within a span of maybe a month and a half, and that's almost 250,000 tons. In addition to that, I think that there was a restriction in Newcastle that you could not export chickpeas, and now you can because of this new terminal, because methyl bromide fumigation and all can be done. So maybe that containers I do understand, but yes, bulk vessels probably would help.
I think, and Sanjeev, you've have experience with the NAT terminal and the increase in terminals. I think one of the things we need to take into account, and it's all well and good to have a port that can load, but it took one train derailment in New South Wales in that 212 crop in December at Boggabri, and the whole net fell down. Everything broke down. We had that massive issue. So it just took one train derailment of a coal train to derail that, and it literally did derail that New South Wales line of logistics. Now, if we, unfortunately in Australia, because of the government inaction and lack of spending on logistics, I don't think that we have a significant rail pathway for pulses and for other products. So I think the buyers and the market needs to understand that, and I'll be very brief, but that if we see another logistics issue, if you see a lack of demand for Desis and other commodities going in front of all pulses, it's going to be very difficult to load them and lift them. So,
okay. Just in one bullish or bearish, Harish, over the next 6 months, price-wise, you'll probably be bearish. But just one word.
I'm bullish.
Bullish. What about you, Sarah?
I think Indian chickpea values should move northwards at least by $50 to $60 minimum, because otherwise they will not come at Australian import parity at all. The old crop values are currently, India is at 440, 450 CNF equivalent. Even if we add 5-month carry cost, we are at 470, 480. Now, if Australia can supply at 470, 480, then that is it.
Well, that wasn't one word, but that's fine. Peter?
Look, I'm probably neutral for the next 8 weeks, then I'm probably mildly bullish. Everybody needs to watch the weather in Australia very closely, but I think we do need a correction upwards, but we're not really seeing evidence of that occurring in the short term.
For next 2 months, I feel market should remain stable. After that, I think it should go up because it's the only cheapest product as compared to other commodities in the world.
All right, then the view of the panelists, it seems that over the next 1 or 2 months, in the very, very short term, probably stable, but otherwise more chances of it going up than anything else. Thank you very much. With this, we wrap up our Desi Chickpea panel, and thanks a lot for listening to us.